Good morning, all. I've been working on the two discussion windows this morning and making some suggestions, but I want to, and I've got some information I want to offer you that I hope will help. I decided to do it this way rather than trying to type all this out and send it to you, which would take me much longer to do because I'm a lousy typist. So this is going to be a kind of a rambling video, and you might want to stop it at points and make sure you understand what I'm saying. First off, I don't know what's going on with the window where I asked you to upload the link to your Works Cited page. But as it turns out, you can, in fact, just copy and paste stuff into those windows. On Blackboard, you couldn't because the HTML formatting would mess up your formatting, so you couldn't cut and copy and paste into a window. But it appears that you can copy and paste into the windows in Canvas. I'm sorry, I kind of created some frustration. I should have checked this out to begin with. And most of you found some workarounds that in one way or another worked, but if you haven't posted yet up there, just go ahead and copy and paste it into the window, and it should work well enough to get a discussion going. A couple of other sort of general things, and then we'll dial down to some specifics. Number one is that you got to think about this whole thing as a process. It cannot happen all at once, which is why you cannot leave it until the last minute, because it can't happen that way. Your point of view emerges and gets focused and dialed down by working with it, discussing it with your colleagues, getting advice on it, refocusing it, re-editing, rewriting, and all of the steps in that How to Avoid Writer's Block PowerPoint that I hope you've looked at. So this is a gradual process, and clarity will emerge gradually, and it depends upon your trusting the process. I'm guiding you through the process, but you have to trust that I know what I'm doing, or else nothing works. So remember, the process of discussing thesis statements this week and working at them and carving them up sharper, that's how it's supposed to work. That is how it works in the real world. So to expect the thesis to, pop out of your mouth fully formed, it doesn't happen that way. So that's what these discussions are designed to do. The other thing that I'll talk about in terms of rhetoric is that I know for some of you, it's boring to write this kind of stuff, and I totally get that. In the real world, again, in college, you'll be assigned boring topics pretty often. We've discussed this before. So sometimes you don't get to pick your topic, and sometimes you'll be assigned a topic, and sometimes that topic is boring. You don't have any control over that. But to decide to write boring work, to turn out a boring product because you're bored with the topic, that's your choice. And you could make other and better choices that will go better for you if you make the choice not to be bored. You decide to be bored. I decide to be bored by X, Y, or Z, and I could make other decisions which typically go better. This is also a fact of higher education that some students don't entirely grasp. So I throw it out there for you. Okay. The third, so you might want to stop now, replay this video up to this point, and just make sure you got my major points. I know I'm rambling a bit, and I'm talking pretty quickly because I don't want to make this thing a half hour long, and I've got some other points to cover. Okay, so in terms of the discussions this week, let's talk about the thesis statement and the opposing viewpoints again. If you will talk about the prompt, answer the question first, and that is to comment upon each other's thesis statements and help each other carve those things into a more sharp focus. That's what you're supposed to talk about. You're not supposed to be talking about the topic. Now, I have no problem if you talk about the topic, and in fact, just a generalized discussion of the topic and the issues, that's how people get their ideas focused. So I'm happy for you to do that, but don't do that instead of answering the prompt. And the prompt is to say, look at each other's thesis statements and offer advice on the thesis statements, and then talk about the topic all you want to, but be sure you answer the prompt first. And the reason for that is I'm trying to reinforce that very specific knowledge and skill of how to write a good thesis statement. So you have to talk about that first if you want to get the good out of the discussions. For instance, for a couple of folks, in the other discussion, the discussion about works cited pages, same thing. You know, the idea is not to discuss the topic first. The idea is to discuss the work and help each other sharpen up the work. That's the smaller piece of the work that you're doing. I'm trying to reinforce, again, correct MLA formatting conventions, and we'll talk about that in just a sec. But what I noticed is, as I read through some of those, some folks say to other folks, oh, your works cited entry is perfect, when in fact it isn't. It's wrong. And so that tells me that the person who wrote the works cited entry hasn't quite got it, and the person who's offering the advice, just saying, boy, that's a great job, also doesn't understand, hasn't got it yet. And so that's the discussion you need to have first. And then by all means, talk about the topic, throw your ideas around, sharpen them up, have just a bullshit session. That's great. But do the other thing first. So there are lots of little errors with some of your works cited entries. And frankly, I'm not going to fix those for you because you've got a handout, you have examples in your textbook. You need to learn to do that for yourself. You need to have that skill. Unless you're willing to pay an editor, and copy editors make a lot of money. I've done it. Copy editors make about $100 a page, quite frankly. So you want to pay somebody $100 a page to do that work for you, then go ahead. But you really ought to have the discipline to do it yourself. And that's so you may want to stop now, re-listen to this part of it, and then I'll talk about the other issue. The next issue. So the deal, so stop it now if you need to. Rest. Okay, good. The deal in being precise about this stuff does not make a dime's bit of difference in the real world. I get that. Totally get that. I don't enjoy it any more than you do. And that's not what we're teaching here. Another area where I disagree with some of my colleagues. What we're teaching here is the discipline to get it right when that's what gets the job done. The discipline to be precise when precision is what is called for. You know, I go to my doctor to get my appendix out. I don't want her cutting all over me to try to find out where the hell the appendix was because she wasn't in class that day. No, I want her to make a little tiny cut, be precise, get the job done. Okay? Same thing with you guys. This is the skill that we're teaching is here's a thing that you need to be absolutely precise about. Here's the absolutely precise model. Follow the model and get it right. Because getting it right, when getting it right is what is called for, is if that's what gets the job done, then get the job done. Play the game to win. Have a strategy so that you win, not a strategy to lose. You make a strategy to win or you make a strategy to lose. So in this case, the strategy to win is very clear, and that's the strategy you should use. Think about it this way. You come to an intersection and you see an octagonal shaped red sign with the word stop on it. You should stop there. Do you have to? Are you physically unable to proceed through that intersection? No. If you're so inclined, can you blow through that intersection? Absolutely. But it'll go better for you in the long run if you observe that convention. It'll go better for you and everybody else. So observing these conventions, and it has to do with spacing, that hanging indent, and the stuff that I gave you specific instructions on how to do, that's how to do it. So do it that way and move on. Again, none of that makes a dime's bit of difference. I totally get that. However, having the discipline and the integrity to get it right when that's what you need to do, that's an important skill. And the way we're practicing that is get the damn works cited pages in the right format. It's not that hard. In fact, it's almost completely automated. So students get that wrong a lot. They think that I don't care whether you know how to do MLA formatting in 6 months. I don't really care. I care that you know how to be precise about your work, because that's a success skill. That's what will take you far. In this class, knowing MLA formatting is the way we practice that. In math class, you practice it another way. Okay. So let's talk now about your papers and the project you're working on. So you may want to stop the video now, back up here. Some of it I'm at, where I'm at 11 minutes. Yeah, okay. First off, and I've said this repeatedly, and I don't really need to say it again, but this is an argument on an issue. You are not exploring a topic. So if your thesis is my topic is global warming, that's not going to work. This assignment is designed for you to discover what you think on an issue if you don't know already, and then support that position. But this thing is, I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. This thing is challenging in a way because of the public rhetoric that we're seeing around us right now. A lot of focus on the election cycle and political speeches and all that kind of thing. That sort of circus freak sideshow shouting match. You cannot look to those people for good examples of public rhetoric. They know how to do it. They're lawyers. They know how to make a good argument. But they also know that making a good argument and talking to people rationally and taking positions on issues is not really what the American public wants to hear. The American public wants to be swayed most of the time by cheap, emotional circus shows. And so it's not that they don't know how, it's that they're not doing it because we give them the impression to them that we don't really care. So the way to restore that over the long term, and of course that's not our purpose here, but the way to restore that over the long term would be for us to start caring and demanding public, rational discussions about serious issues rather than these childish adolescent shouting matches. But that's all you're seeing is the childish adolescent shouting matches. And if you're looking to that as a model for rational public rhetoric, you won't find it there, which is why we're learning it here, because we don't have it there. So this paper is heavily biased in favor of your opinion, of your argument. But you do have to touch on the opposing argument. I always say roughly the rule ought to be it's 75% your opinion and 25% or less the opposition. The opposition and your answer to the opposition in a 7-page researched argument should be 1 paragraph. This is not a balanced exploration of a topic. This is your position, and it is heavily biased in favor of your position, but it must be a rational argument. And then you have to find a rational opposing argument, which you think is just weaker than yours in some way or not as well supported or something. But you don't want to feature the opposition. This is not a balanced exploration of a topic. It's a persuasive piece of rhetoric in which you take a position and defend it. So I put up a thing about the null hypothesis, and you don't need to be too worried about that. The null hypothesis is a precise statistical term that has a lot of rules to it, none of which you need to worry about. But you do need to know this. The null hypothesis is like the devil's advocate in a courtroom argument. The devil's advocate is the lawyer who takes up the opposing point of view just to focus the argument. So if you and I are practicing arguing and I take up the opposing position to you just to help you notice holes in your own argument, then I'm acting as the devil's advocate, or my position is the null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis is that hypothetical opponent, rational opponent, not some screaming Mimi from the political circles, a rational opponent who argues against you. And, that person may not exist, but the null hypothesis is a hypothetical formula. So when you're thinking about your opposition, let's go back to our crazy lizard people thesis that global warming is caused by lizard people. Okay? You would have to argue, you'd have to find evidence for that. If you were writing this paper for real, you'd have to find evidence for that, support yourself, put the evidence out there in a rational way, and also touch upon one rational argument. So if my thesis is the global warming is caused by lizard people, the null hypothesis, or the antithesis, if you will, if you want to use that term, would be global warming is not caused by lizard people. So the more precise your thesis is, the more precise your opposition viewpoint is. Antithesis, A-N-T-I-T-H-E-S-I-S. You see the word thesis in there, and you see the word anti-thesis. That is a very good rhetorical device to position two things that are in opposition to each other in some way. One of the most well-known speeches using an antithetical arrangement is the famous speech by Jesus of Nazareth called the Sermon on the Mount, or it's called in rhetorical terms the antitheses being plural. You are poor, but you will be rich. You are sad, but you will be happy. That's a powerful way to organize a piece of public rhetoric. And whoever wrote those actual words and wherever they came from, they're organized as an antithetical speech. You're poor, you'll be rich. You're sad, you'll be happy. You are oppressed, you will be liberated. That whole speech is arranged in that way. So if you can boil your thesis down to global warming is caused by lizard people, global warming is not caused by lizard people, if you can be that precise about your thesis, that'll really help you get focused. That's worth doing some work on, because that'll make the job of the thing so much easier. If you've got 3 or 4 elements in your thesis and 3 or 4 elements in your opposing thesis, you're going to get buried under that little bit of organization right there, and it's going to be really hard to do the actual work. One of your colleagues had a thesis that had sort of that issue to it, and now I can't remember who it was. So we won't belabor that point. I'll go back maybe and point it out. The last thing is, I'm going to pick on Pete a little bit, because I know Pete can handle it. If you look at his thesis about vaccinations, his thesis has the word ridiculous in it, the ridiculous notion that blah, blah, blah. What that does, and Pete won't mind if I pick on him a little bit, what language like that does is it already prejudges the opposition. Calling the opposition ridiculous is not arguing. Calling the opposition ridiculous is what somebody with a very bad blonde blowover do is sort of doing in public right now. I won't mention any names, because that's political. But there's a guy out there who's calling people bad names and ridiculous and idiots and losers, and that's not arguing. That would not convince rational people. So using that kind of language in your thesis tends to already set the reader. The reader knows you think the opposition is a bunch of idiots going in, and that's not the way to have a discussion with a rational person. These essays are supposed to be sort of really conversations with rational people who oppose you. And again, you don't see that in our public life. It's gone in our public life. And it's a skill that's worth, in my opinion, and what keeps me working in this business for these many years, is that we need to restore that skill. I've got another speech which I won't bore you with about why it's so critical to get that skill back. But if you, my advice to Pete was, if you can use a little more neutral language in your thesis, because it will be clear that you believe your opinion is much stronger, because 75% of your paper is going to be supporting your opinion. So you don't have to call the opposition an idiot in your thesis, because a neutral reader who picks that up going in is going to intuit that your argument against the opposition is just going to be that they're idiots, and that's not rational rhetoric. Again, a rational person would reject that immediately. I'm going on way too long about that point, but remember that if you view that errors in thesis statements PowerPoint, you have to be a little bit careful about your use of language if you want to engage the reader. I'm not saying you shouldn't be strong in your opinions. I'm not saying you shouldn't support your opinions. But calling the other guy an idiot doesn't win an argument. It may win elections, but it doesn't win an argument between rational people. So, when you get into those, so I'm going to recap now real quick. When you get into the discussions, answer the prompt first, because that's the skill we're trying to reinforce. And if I don't see evidence that you understand the skill, I can't assess your understanding of the skill until the paper comes, by which point it's too late. I have to know now that there's holes in your knowledge about how to do an MLA citation, so I can help you fix it now before you turn the paper in and lose points. Okay, so I need to know what you know. And then if you want to have discussions, that's great. I love the way you guys talk. You're the most talkative class in terms of your discussions I've had in a long time, and it's interesting, and I love to get in and talk with you. But you got to do the other thing first. This is a class, and you got to do the other thing first. Okay. So, as you're focusing your thesis, again, getting that focused thesis is real critical. As you're focusing it, be sure that it's as clear on your opinion as possible, and that the opposition is also as clear as possible. And it has to be a reasonable opposition. It can't be. For instance, in the real world, I couldn't say, going back to global warming, I couldn't say global warming is caused by human activity, which is an argument that could be supported rationally, and also the opposition could be that global warming is not caused by human activity. But in the real essay, global warming is caused by lizard people would not be a reasonable opposition, because it's absurd. It's just ridiculous, and there's that word. Okay, so you see what I'm saying? The opposition has to be a rational opposition to your position, not some crazy bozo out there in Montana behind a fence. Those people are not rational, and they're not interested in engaging in rational discussion. Okay, it's one of the dangers of fundamentalism, and I'm not going to give you that speech today. So anyway, just get into the discussions and answer the prompt first, and then talk about whatever you want to talk about. But remember, if you don't answer the question, I can't give you full credit, because that's not what I'm not asking for a discussion on the issue. I'm asking for, look at Joe Blow's thesis statement and tell me if you think it's a good one or not. And if you think it's good, why? And if you think it isn't good, why? And how can Joe Blow fix it? That's the job of that discussion. Both of them this week. Okay. The job of that discussion is not to talk about the issue. Okay, you can do that. It's fine if you do that, but don't do that instead of. All right, I need to stop because I'm just repeating myself over and over again. Let me just take a quick look at my notes. I think that's about it. That's all I can say that will help you today. So play this thing over 2 or 3 times. I don't know. It's gotten to be awfully long. Geez, we're at 25 minutes now. I've got to shut up. All right, have a great weekend. View this thing a few times. Dial it down. Get focused. We've only have about 10, 15 days total left. And then we'll see what we've learned. Thank you. Bye.